When we think of great sci-fi, our minds are often cast back to the 1980s. With movies like The Thing, The Terminator and Aliens, it was clear that decade was a golden age for the genre. But there are lesser-known sci-fi films that came out recently which deserved a lot more recognition. Considering so many of these movies are available on streaming services like Netflix and Amazon Prime, there's nothing stopping you checking them out right this second. So with that in mind then, here are recent sci-fi movies you probably haven't seen. In the Shadow of the Moon. In the Shadow of the Moon begins with a cop called Locke whose night patrol starts like any other night. But when 3 random people across the city suddenly die after their brains melt from the inside, Locke can't make heads or tails over what killed them. For the next 20 years, he obsesses over the case, unaware his actions will shape the world's future. If you went into this film cold, you wouldn't have the slightest clue you were watching sci-fi. Until the end, the story plays out like a detective thriller, but as the science fiction qualities slowly but surely seep into the plot, you realise what Locke is dealing with is far from ordinary police work. Like most great mysteries, In the Shadow of the Moon has a perfect balance of not revealing too much until the climax, while simultaneously maintaining intrigue from the opening scene. Even though the film deals with some complex scientific concepts and profound theories, it focuses on Locke's struggle above all else, giving the viewer a deeper connection to the story.
Something in the Dirt. Dumping a great many comedic and often horrifying elements into their latest slice of provoking sci-fi goodness. Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, the minds behind Spring and Endless, were at it again in the thick of the pandemic. And it was during that real-life horror of a time that the two, along with a skeleton crew, were able to forge Something in the Dirt, a tale involving 2 new neighbours discovering a seemingly supernatural phenomena. Things take numerous gripping and often darkly hilarious turns along the way, with Benson's Levi and Moorhead's John learning as much about themselves as they do the surreal floating quartz, and flickering lights in the former's apartment over the course of their conspiracy/paranoia-stuffed odyssey. Both Benson and Moorhead absolutely knock it out of the park, both in front of and behind the camera, creating a set of carefully drawn figures built to personally clash, with the help of some top-class dialogue, as their quest to make some money off of the bizarre occurrences via a documentary ultimately changes both men's lives forever. For a sub-2 hour dose of thoughtful, spooky and routinely comical low-budget sci-fi, very few recent outings hold a candle to Benson and Moorhead's Dive into the Dirt.
Code 8. Code 8 works like a more realistic version of X-Men. In this world, superpowered individuals, or powers, don't use their abilities to battle supervillains or aliens. Instead, they are assigned jobs which fit their skill set. Since superhumans took all the big jobs, countless non-powered people are made redundant, causing a lot of resentment in society. When powers are replaced themselves by robots called Guardians, which work like the X-Men Sentinels, they are figuratively tossed onto the street, forcing many of them to turn to crime to survive. If you are bored of formulaic CGI-filled superhero flicks but still enjoy the core concept, Code 8 is the movie for you. It performs better world-building in the first 5 minutes than most blockbusters manage in their entirety. The special effects are used sparingly but always look slick and polished. Also, if you're a fan of CW's Arrowverse, Code 8 has siblings Stephen and Robbie Amell as the 2 leads. The only real detriment is the film only clocks in at 98 minutes. Because the filmmakers created such a magnificent world, it's a shame the viewers didn't get a chance to see more of it.
Significant Other. Thrown onto Paramount Plus in October of last year without all that much fanfare, Dan Burke and Robert Olsen's Alien in the Woods sci-fi horror Significant Other may just sit as one of the streaming service's finest hidden gems to date. The flick is centered around a couple who venture out on a camping trip together, with it being pretty evident early on that the pair are going through something of a rough patch, and said difficult period is only intensified when it becomes clear that they aren't the only ones setting up camp amongst these trees either. What comes next is an at times surprisingly hilarious, and often shocking in more ways than one 84-minute breeze of a creepy sci-fi picture. Maika Monroe keeps you locked into the tension felt throughout, with her deeply conflicted and anxiety-stricken work as Ruth, whereas Jake Lacey's warm yet subtly unsettling turn as Harry also evolves into an unexpected gift of a showing as the plot thickens. If you're looking for an easy combination of frights and dark delights on a Saturday night, then Significant Other could be the film for you.
Spectral. Spectral centers on a supernatural black ops team who fight ghosts. Based on the premise alone, you'd think this is the sort of trashy B-movie churned out by Asylum Studios. But Spectral works because everything is played straight. When the military first detect the phantoms on a Spectral camera, they assume they're just a glitch. When the apparitions begin attacking soldiers, the government officials assume they're dealing dealing with a human enemy with cloaking technologies. When the officials realise the threat is supernatural, they refuse to tell their men, believing they won't take the mission seriously. Unsurprisingly, this lack of communication prevents the soldiers from being prepared for the metaphysical threat, causing many of them to die needlessly. Instead of filling the runtime with excessive backstories and forced banter, Spectral jumps into the action straight away and rarely lets up. Since the enemy is invisible and can kill anyone it touches, every scene is dripping with tension. Even though once respected sci-fi franchises like The Terminator and The Matrix have been chucking out pointless and bloated sequels in recent years, creative films like Spectral prove the genre still has plenty to offer.
Samaritan. It feels odd to note how a Sylvester Stallone sci-fi action adventure somehow managed to slip through the cracks somewhat over the last 12 months or so. But in the case of Amazon Prime's Samaritan, you'll likely struggle to find too many folks who bothered to tune into Sly's take on all things superhero after it was somewhat battered critically upon release, which is a bit of a shame in all honesty. Admittedly, Samaritan doesn't exactly breathe new life into the oversaturated supersphere, but what it does bring is a strong central pair of performances from both Stallone as Joe Smith and the relentlessly charming Javen Walton as the young Samaritan-obsessed Sam Cleary. The odd ball of cheese one-liner spouted by the veteran action star may not be to everyone's liking, sure, but if you can't find the fun in Stallone telling a doomed adversary to have a blast before blowing him to kingdom come, then Samaritan was never going to be your idea of a fun time. And over this crap, Sly super thumping his way through many a faceless henchman against the backdrop of a dark family tale doesn't reinvent the wheel. Yet there's far more joy to be found here, along with a decent enough twist, than what those damning reviews would suggest.
Prospect. In Prospect, a teenage girl called C finds herself stuck on an alien planet. Out of desperation, she is forced to ally with Ezra, the man who's indirectly responsible for her father's death. From the very beginning, the sci-fi aspect is on full display, but as the plot unfolds, it focuses more on Ezra and C building a relationship despite their heated conflict. Even though Ezra could be depicted as irredeemable, Pedro Pascal has no difficulty finding the character's humanity, making you deeply care about him, even though his duplicity makes it impossible to tell where his loyalty truly lies. Because of the shoestring budget, under $4 million, the special effects are minimal. However, fans of the genre won't feel cheated at all, since the powerhouse performances of the leads are guaranteed to keep anyone enthralled. Since Prospect isn't well known, it's no surprise it failed to make a splash upon its release back in 2018. But due to its subtle world building, sharp script, non-cliched characters, and nuanced performances, it's gradually earning a reputation as an underappreciated gem in the genre.
Vesper. Stepping into the dystopian corner of the sci-fi universe now, and into last year's visually gorgeous and entirely unique story of a 13-year-old Vesper surviving in a world wrecked by the aftermath of genetic tech investments going catastrophically wrong. An uncompromising look at the lengths humanity will go to keep from being erased from the face of the planet, though one also teeming with otherworldly life as Cristina Biotite and Bruno Samper masterfully craft an environment that feels like one you could but probably shouldn't explore in this reality. Though one also teeming with otherworldly life, as Cristina Biotite and Bruno Samper masterfully craft an environment that feels like one you could but probably shouldn't explore in this reality. Something likely aided by the fact much of this post-apocalyptic world was created without the use of digital effects. The heart and soul of this harsh yet hopeful sci-fi outing comes in the form of Raffaella Chapman's titular biohacking lead though. On top of caring for her paralysed father, who maintains a caring presence throughout via floating drone tech, Vesper must navigate a perilous world outside of the Citadels, one containing unsettling cult leader uncles brought to chilling life by Eddie Marzan, and modified seeds being traded for grub, as she dreams of one day setting foot in that apparent promised land. A brutal coming-of-age sci-fi tale, but one that still offers wonder and a few flickers of light in the darkness for those wanting to witness the growth of a potential cult hit of tomorrow.
Oxygen. Oxygen opens with a woman called Liz awakening in a sealed chamber. She is informed by an artificial intelligence unit that she will run out of air in under 2 hours. At first, the premise sounds identical to Ryan Reynolds' Buried, save for the futuristic setting, but Oxygen has one difference that stops it from feeling like a carbon copy. In this film, Liz doesn't know who she is, meaning she cannot begin to guess why she's been placed in such a container. She doesn't even know if her chamber is in a science lab, underground, or outer space. Not only that, her AI is programmed to avoid answering key questions, forcing Liz to speak to the computer in a roundabout way to uncover the truth. When Liz starts to piece everything together, the viewer might feel like the story will lose its appeal, since the mystery is gone. But don't worry, Oxygen keeps throwing curveballs at you until the last few minutes, not giving the viewer a moment to relax. With an intricate script, a phenomenal performance from Melanie Laurent, and creative direction, Oxygen is guaranteed to keep viewers engaged from start to finish.
Meet Cute. From a quick glance at the poster for Kaylee Cuoco and Pete Davidson's peacock rom-com by the name of Meet Cute, you'd be forgiven for assuming this was simply going to sit as yet another chunk of wisecracking and awkward romance. But you'd only be half right in this case. That's because the formulaic girl meets boy tale is given a bit of a sci-fi injection, in the form of a time machine helping transform the pair's love story into a time loop recipe for disaster, with Cuoco's Sheila opting to continually return to a bar containing Davidson's Gary on the back of discovering a time machine that only allows her to spend 24 hours in the past or future in her local nail salon. The lovebirds embark on hundreds of first dates, beautifully shot in a way that only further romanticizes Sheila's growing and increasingly uncomfortable obsession with a dude who has repeatedly only just met her. The unexpectedly dark reality behind why Cuoco's lead insists on replaying the magical evening only makes her living through the entire arc of this relationship/first date even more tragic to behold. Cuoco's performance in particular is worth giving this particular sci-fi meet cute a chance alone, effortlessly conveying Sheila's irrepressible charm and the tortured soul within. Don't be fooled by the cover, your average rom-com this is not.
Advantageous. Advantageous is set in a future where most of humanity is suffering with poverty and infertility. When a mother called Gwen loses her job and is unable to secure an education for her daughter, she agrees to an experimental procedure which will transfer her mind into a better, younger body. When the transfer is successful, Gwen assumes her whole life will turn out for the better. Unfortunately, this is not the case. One problem which many futuristic films suffer is how they overstuff scenes with an ostentatious amount of special effects, which can be quite distracting. After all, it's hard to get invested in a character's story while they are flying cars zooming around in the background. Even though Advantageous is set in the dystopian future, the visuals and the post-apocalyptic angle are heavily downplayed, making the story more relatable. In fact, the movie focuses so much on the characters, it's easy to forget that the story takes place in the future. It effectively juggles themes about racism, ageism, and class conflict while never taking away from the fundamental story.
Zheng, offering a futuristic glimpse at an Earth rendered uninhabitable due to climate change, Netflix's Zheng throws sci-fi fans into a gripping action thriller involving the factions found on the shelters humanity had built in space going to war early on. But this simply acts as the prologue for the real meat of the story. Captain Young Zheng ultimately grows to become a somewhat mythical figure for the Allied forces battling against Adrian Republic. But when she unfortunately fails her all-important final mission and ends up in a coma shortly afterwards, the Chronoid AI technology company eventually gets their hands on her brain. It's then cloned before being installed into numerous android bodies as the company look to create the ultimate mercenary AI, Zheng. Come for the promise of some undeniably enthralling fight sequences and utterly stunning world building, stay for the moving work unleashed by Kang Soo-yeon as Zheng-Yi's daughter, an eventual Chronoid laboratory team leader, and Kim Hyun-ju's outstanding ability to effectively bring all versions of the titular android/human to poignant life. The odd dodgy performance and questionable choice of dialogue here or there occasionally threatens to derail the emotional mother-daughter relationship at the film's core, but the well-crafted twists, action, and visuals ensure this is not an AI drama to be slept on.
Level 16. Level 16 revolves around an all-girls militaristic facility called the Vestalis Academy. All the students are trained by the facilitators to have feminine virtues to help them get adopted. Even though the overseers are abhorrently strict and cruel, the girls obey them without question, believing the academy is their only chance of having a real family. But when one teenager, Vivian, suspects her mentors are hiding something from her, she does all she can to expose their true intentions. Level 16 plays out like a much smarter version of Michael Bay's The Island. The premise may be similar, but Level 16 feels more like a psychological drama akin to Black Mirror rather than a sci-fi flick. Even though the horror factor could have been ramped up, it is rarely utilised, which makes the scary parts far more disturbing. Because the girls are meant to be emotionless and laconic, it would be easy for the characters to come across as dull, but due to the film's talented ensemble, especially the lead Katie Douglas, the cast invoke a lot of emotion while saying very little.
Duel. Karen Gillan takes centre stage here as a dying woman who opts to clone herself in order to ensure her family don't have to go through the pain of her being taken away from them. In this world though, clones have the right to reject being decommissioned after their creation, meaning that when Gillan's Sarah is hilariously told that her certain death now isn't actually on the cards, Sarah's double's refusal to be terminated means they are soon told to prepare for an imminent duel to the death. Naturally, the Nebula MCU star absolutely knocks it out of the park as a figure who tragically and ludicrously finds herself in a scenario where her loved ones actually prefer her replica, with a cold walkthrough of some practice combat with Aaron Paul's also exceptional trainer Trent being one of many unanticipated highlights to be found here. Equal parts savage and side-splitting, this intelligent Riley Stearns outing puts the universal fear of death under the microscope and delivers a cloning story unlike anything you've probably seen before.
Freaks. Freaks begins with a young girl called Chloe being forced by her father to memorize details about her fake mother. When she can't answer a basic question about sport, her dad tells Chloe her behavior is going to get her killed. Although her father tells Chloe very little about the outside world, she believes he is just keeping her safe. But there's still many things she doesn't understand. What is so dangerous out there? Why does Chloe sometimes wake up in a different house? Why does a chained woman appear in her room sometimes? It's better to go into Freaks blind, since being aware of the premise will spoil the film's many surprises. Even though the viewer knows for a fact that not everything is as it seems, the plot goes in directions which the most attentive viewer won't expect. For the majority of the movie, it's impossible to tell if the characters around Chloe are evil or they are genuinely trying to protect her. The big reveal may not be particularly original, but it doesn't feel anticlimactic, since the film forces the viewer to be completely invested in Chloe's journey of self-discovery.
Apollo 10.5, A Space-Age Childhood. Richard Linklater's animated Saturday morning cartoon influenced and partially fictionalized story of a youngster being fired off into space just before the events of Apollo 11 was one which passed many by, despite boasting some unquestionably strong reviews. This entirely charming, nostalgic glimpse back into the 60s, loosely based on the Before trilogy director's own childhood, just couldn't find an audience both in theaters or on Netflix in the end. Admittedly, much of the flick is spent outside of the realms of genuine sci-fi, with Linklater focusing more on Stanley's upbringing and the way the world around him, specifically Houston, altered around the time of the space race. But the way Linklater playfully laces Stanley's fictional/dreamed-up pre-Apollo 11 mission to the moon into the real-life events throughout this rotoscope animation coming-of-age tale is an absolute triumph to behold. Even if you have next to no interest in this era of human history coming into this massively underappreciated picture, you'll no doubt find yourself heading out of it wishing this loving memory of a film didn't have to reach an end. In short, Linklater has created another blast.
What happened to Monday? What Happened to Monday takes place in a world where overpopulation has forced the world's governments to issue a law so families can only bear one child. After a woman dies giving birth to identical septuplets, their grandfather Terence takes them in and names them after the 7 days of the week. To avoid the government learning of the children's existence, Terence orders each of them to venture out in public on the day they're named after. Monday goes out on Monday, Tuesday goes out on Tuesday, etc., etc. So they can pretend they're all the same person. After living in secret for 30 years, Monday disappears, jeopardizing the family's life. Even though What Happened to Monday has fluid action and an inventive world, it's the performances that stand out. Although Willem Dafoe is known for playing larger-than-life characters, films like this prove he's equally as talented at portraying someone more down-to-earth. However, it's impossible for Noomi Rapace not to dominate the film since she plays the septuplets. Even though playing multiple parts can cause an actor to overact to define each of them, Rapace makes all 7 characters feel like human beings rather than caricatures.
After Yang. The fact the Irish powerhouse was also able to add another touch of class to Koga Nada's generally overlooked After Yang. After Yang sees the family unit of Jake, Kira, their adoptive daughter Mika, and robotic teenager Yang all going about their futuristic lives. But tragedy soon strikes when Yang, a culture unit purchased as a way to help Mika connect with her Chinese heritage, malfunctions. And with the bot now not being under warranty, Jake is then forced to find a somewhat cheap way to mend this vital family member. From here, Farrell, Jodie Jodie Turner-Smith, Justin H. Min, and the rest of the Pitch Perfect gang thoughtfully take audiences on a slow burning but always captivating exploration into what it is to be human, coping with loss, and humanity's increasing reliance on technology. And if that hasn't already sold you on one of the finest sci-fi entries of recent times, then perhaps the promise of an opening dance-off credit sequence for the ages will do the trick. Seriously, it's bloody gold.
I Am Mother. I Am Mother centers around an android called Mother who cares for a girl called Daughter in a secluded facility after human civilization has been destroyed. Even though the robot seems devoted to Daughter, an encounter with a mysterious woman makes her realize Mother may not be as benevolent as she appears. As intriguing as the premise is, I Am Mothers could come across as boring due to its minimal sets and cast. Thankfully, the phenomenal performances of Hilary Swank and Clara Rugard will ensure viewers are absolutely captivated. However, Swank isn't the standout for once. Despite being a two-time Oscar-winning actress, it's Mother who dominates the film. With her unblinking eye and clanking movements, she's guaranteed to keep the viewer on edge. Her gentle voice makes her more unnerving, especially when she justifies actions that are suspicious or immoral. Even though Mother is just a guy in a suit, the practical effects are so good, the average viewer would assume the robot is 100% CGI. When you realise this character was brought to life mostly through animatronics and practical effects, you appreciate the film even more.
Brian and Charles. From one little-watched, unexpectedly moving robo story to another, Brian is a passionate inventor. It's just unfortunate that the majority of his innovations aren't what you class as useful, or even logical half the time, but that still couldn't stop him from taking on the mammoth task of creating his own artificially intelligent robot pal after stumbling upon a mannequin head one day. And what do you know, he only goes and pulls it off, bringing to life the box-towering piece of brilliance that is Charles, and giving birth to what can only be classed as the latest iconic sci-fi human robo duo. Brian and Charles don't just deliver the laughs over the course of their awkward burgeoning bromance though, as Jim Archer's dramedy also comes equipped with its fair share of genuine jeopardy within its small Welsh town locale. Those farmers can be murdered when they spot a tap-dancing android, you know. Just as Charles Petrescu learns more and more about this crazy world he's been bizarrely brought into, you'll soon discover that charming lo-fi comedy likely doesn't get any better than this.